Welcome back, everybody, for Freaky Friday, Freaky Philosophy Friday with Dr. Jim joining us once again. We're going to take your questions, whatever you would send our way. I see we've already got
within the bounds of good taste,
or not.
or not. You could overestimate how far that goes.
Yeah, we'll just save the other ones for the after show for the patrons. Yeah. We've got
we could have a paid to play QnA.
Yeah,
where like we tell you what we really think of your wife, right?
If anybody wants to sign up for that, you can let us know in the comment.
Yeah.
We've got
there's a waiver. You're signing a waiver though before you can.
Oh yeah, for sure. We've got lots of good already. Just you guys never give us the easy questions. I'm just skimming some here. We've got some big stuff to get through. We're going to get warmed up first, but please do us a favor. Please like, please comment, please share. Please send in your chat questions. You know, this helps the algorithm. And yeah, man, before we start doing some Q&A, what's happening? What's new? What you been thinking about? What you been working on?
I've been teaching Hegel's logic, the encyclopedia logic, and to good effect this week. The young people seem to go a long way with me on that one.
That's amazing. That surprises me.
Yeah, started Kant in my ethics class. That's going well.
Yep.
My second oldest son has senior night for his soccer team today. So I'm pretty happy with that. Good boy. And I did a great deal of Turkish get-ups this morning, and feeling good about it.
Yeah, so good.
I because of senior night for soccer, I'm not able to train jiu-jitsu tonight. And what's the next best thing? It's the Turkish get-ups. So I went at it with the get-ups. So.
Yeah, we did. My wife was doing, I think, a get up medley today. She
nice.
was. I put up a picture of her on Facebook. She looked pretty awesome. She was wearing an old Street Sharks shirt. Do you remember that? It was like a cartoon from the 90s.
Yeah.
Somehow my wife has one of those.
Nice.
And just bulging traps. She was looking
nice,
looking proper after the get up medley.
Miss Slow, man.
Yeah, what was my last workout? I did not get a chance to hit the weights today. We'll do something after this.
Yep.
Yesterday I had just a nice little complex of some presses, some swings, and actually that was it. That was all I needed. So we're feeling good. We're yeah, man, Friday. I love Fridays. I love these Q&As. So I don't know, Jim, any preliminaries, or you want to just start whacking away at some of this stuff?
Let's do it.
Yeah, dude, we'll just dive right in. You know, there's a question I wanted to get first because this came in before. So then I'll hit this first and then we'll go back in order or whatever. We'll just do whatever.
Yep.
This one comes from Harry. He said it before. He says, "What are the major flaws of Aristotelian naturalism, in your opinion?" And I think this comes out of previous conversations, Jim, where we've kind of talked about ways that if somebody isn't a theist, that maybe they could try and secure moral reasoning. And I said, I think if I weren't a theist and I was really kind of hell bent on not trying to explain away morality but secure it, I would do the best I could to still be an Aristotelian but a naturalist, right? Yeah. And there are some of them out there. They're rare, but there are some Aristotelian naturalists out there.
Like my longest best friend is an Aristotelian naturalist.
Yeah, so they're rare, and I think they're rare because I think once you kind of see the world as an Aristotelian, it so naturally lends itself to theism. Yeah, I just think that's the case.
Well, yeah, I guess I would. I mean, I don't think you're an Aristotelian unless you're a theist in some sense. Right?
Yeah, I agree. Now, why would I think that? What are the major flaws? Well, I think it's major flaws in terms of ultimate intelligibility, right? What you can do proximately versus ultimately. So, I mean, for example, if you admit that there's such things as essences, and then you probe the intelligibility of that, you realize that there is, say, a real distinction between essence and existence. To make sense of why some essences are instantiated rather than others, you're going to have to get back to that which just is subsistent existence itself, and then you're a theist, right? Yeah. So I think being an Aristotelian sets you up for like Aquinas' De Ente, right? To make sense of essentialism, and essentialism is a core commitment of Aristotelianism. And then you can just kind of play that angle from the different, say, transcendentals. You can do the same thing from goodness. You can just make a move from goodness, or even truth. Some really, arguments, even contemporary arguments from sort of broad neo-Aristotelians, like Bill Valachella's got an incredible argument called From Facts to God. And he's just arguing from the eternal unifier of facts as an argument for theism from an Aristotelian perspective. So for me, my short answer to this is when you think about what ultimately can sustain and make intelligible the broad commitments of Aristotelianism, I think it's only theism at the end of the day.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, okay, I guess I misunderstood Harry's question, right? So
I could be misunderstanding it. So take it however you want.
What I took, because sometimes when people will talk about Aristotelian naturalism, they mean the sense in which Aristotle was himself a kind of naturalist. Okay, meaning that you don't need a supernatural, in the modern sense of supernatural, like perspective to understand ethics and science and things like that. Okay, but I think maybe what he means here is, can you be like one of these contemporary Aristotelian metaphysicians, like, who also claim that, so they want to basically have Aristotle's story about maybe virtue ethics and maybe like material composition, but it's completely untied to the broader story that Aristotle's telling about, that includes theism and conscious planets, right, and stuff like that. Okay, right. I mean, I think, but I don't think that position is coherent. I mean, I don't think you can really lift some of the stuff out of Aristotle as neatly as you want. And I think a lot of those what are called the contemporary naturalist Aristotelians, what they're saying has precious little to do with Aristotle. Okay,
yeah,
and that's no mark against them. They would tell you that, right? You know what I mean? Now, just so let's suppose we don't. What we mean by Aristotelian naturalism, right, is something that's still trying to say this is the view that Aristotle held. Okay. Okay. Well, if what you mean by naturalism is like some kind of materialism, okay, and well, once again, all these distinctions, the natural and the supernatural, material and material, they are not drawn by the Greeks at all in the way that we draw them now. Okay, and I think it's an artificial imposition on the Greek. We talked about this in a recent episode about, like,
this was behind the scenes. We talked about it in the
exactly
in the what we really think section.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and if anyone would like privy to that, see our Patreon, right? But we can't. We have to quit trying to ask, like, how do we fit the classical view into our contemporary questions? And maybe we should ask ourselves, are our contemporary questions even the right questions to be asking, given they're not the questions of the classical world, right? At least we should be open to that. But anyway, so
no, that's brilliant. Yeah, no, that's good, because I'm reading this question in light of the previous conversations we've had, but your way of looking at it is also, I think, really important. And you're right. I mean, like, the world for, certainly for Aquinas, but even going back to Aristotle and Plato, I would say was thoroughly enchanted, right? It's an enchanted world. And if there's any distinctions between natural and supernatural, the only, like, contemporary way I think they would map on is between the bounded and the unbounded. And that's it, right? So for Aquinas, like, angels, or as a Thomist, I would say, angels are natural beings. Why are they natural beings? Because they're bounded, they're restricted beings. So there's limit instances of existence, and there's one limit case, and that's it, right?
And for Aristotle, I think God is a natural being in a perfectly good sense. He's not. First of all, for Aristotle, God doesn't create, right? Okay, and God is integral to this whole system of nature. He doesn't stand outside of it and make it, right? Okay, I mean, there's a sense he's outside of it, right? And for Aristotle, I'm being very careful when I say, like, God is a natural being. For Aristotle, like, there's a ton of, like, asterisk footnotes on that. Okay, but also, for Aristotle, right, the, like, material, immaterial, good luck. Really, you don't really find that. I mean, it gets translated, but, like, for him, the question is eternal versus temporal, right? Subsequent change, ultimately stable. Those are the distinctions from it. It's not natural, supernatural, right? It's not material. It's eternal versus temporal, right? And God is eternal and therefore immaterial and, like, distinct among all things and all that, right? Okay. All right. So all of that as a preface to answer Harry's question now. In the metaphysics, and if we want to think of the metaphysics as, like, the crowning piece of the whole system for Aristotle, in the book, The Metaphysics, like, he comes to the conclusion that substance, and he basically says, if there's no science of being, then, like, then we live in a tragic universe, right? And there is no ultimate fact of anything, and it's like, nihilism is coming, right? Okay. And so he's saying, like, there needs to be a science of being, and he thinks he can prove there is one based on, like, kind of these first cause-ish arguments he makes. And then he says, look, but what okay, before we can like even pursue the science of being, we have to ask like, what is the base concept of being? What is it in the most strict sense for being to be? And we'll call that substance. Long story, throughout the whole of the metaphysics, it's coming to like, what is that grounding concept of being or notion of being that we can use to ground the science of being? And he comes to its ungrounded thinking activity, right? It's thought thinking itself, which is his word for God. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
If you don't have that, the whole Aristotelian metaphysic, as Aristotle saw it, is a failure.
It's yeah. At that point, I think you're spot on that you're really not an Aristotelian anymore, even if you're just taking bits and pieces. And we do find a number of, and I think an increasing number of naturalists that are kind of like going to their old neighbor Aristotle and asking to borrow a cup of sugar from his worldview, right?
Yeah,
instead of just adopting the whole pantry, right?
Yeah.
So
I think Philip Goff's one of those guys. Right?
Yeah, and like even Oppie's one of those guys in a sense. He seems to borrow from like virtue ethics, but it's to me, I think it's much more of a package deal than people realize. Yeah,
and and people, I think this is why we need to study Aristotle, right? So then the metaphysics is the whole thing is held together with that notion of divinity as thought thinking itself, and everything else is trying to like get to that thing, right? But then go to De Anima, like what is it about us, what is it about the human soul that's special? It's because we too can have a gear where we are thought thinking about thought, right? So it's like the human, his whole anthropology is tied up, right? And a distinctive human anthropology is tied up with an identity of sorts with that thought thinking thought.
There's a notion of the imago Dei in Aristotle.
Imago Dei, right? Yeah, exactly. And it's an achievement for him, right? Okay, but go to the ethics, right? Like the book 10 of the ethics, ultimately, what the good is to become thought thinking thought yourself, right? I mean, so it's to fulfill the promise of De Anima is the good life, right? For Aristotle. And so if you pull that out of there, there's nothing left.
Yeah.
There's nothing, like it's gone. Like Aristotle, the last line of the main body of the metaphysics, there's further books, but they're probably appendices, is he quotes, I forget which poet he quotes. He says, look, what I've shown you here is being will only be governed by one, right? And let being be governed well, right? And the one is thought thinking thought. And like that he's saying the whole thing rests on that, right?
Yeah.
So
excellent. How's that, Harry? Money's worth?
Yeah.
Satisfied?
That was sorry, I just like supervillain ranted there. I'm sorry.
You pulled a Socrates.
That's right. Yeah, it's like
all right.
Let's, by the way, I just taught this text, right? So like here
let's talk to Parisa. Parisa just sent me an email of an article of the impoverished worldview that is naturalism that I promised to read. So thank you for that, Parisa. I will put that in the queue. But let's go to your question. Parisa says, my totally unrelated question for today. How would you analyze the concept of, quote, fitting? For example, it was fitting for God to create the world. Yeah, this is really good. Jim, I have my thoughts on this, but do you want to go? Do you want to go first? Do you want me to?
I mean, what I do with fitting, and this is kind of out of my wheelhouse, but I think of it aesthetically, right? And I think this is how Balthazar thinks about it, right?
I think you're spot on with Balthazar's approach.
Okay, and to say it was fitting is to say that and I'll go with Kant on this. Like to say something is beautiful is to say there's no law that dictates it to be that way. Okay, so there's no moral law that demands it. There's no physical law that demands it, but yet it ought to be this way still. There's this other kind of ambiguous ought that humans have a sense of, but we cannot conceptualize it, right? This is very, very important for Kant's system, right? And so that's how I think of fitting claims, right? Yeah. Is to say, no, and you get these all over, like in theology. It's kind of a fudge thing when we get stuck. We say, well, it's fitting, right? But
you gotta be careful with it.
Yeah, be careful with it. Yeah, like don't play that card too often, right?
Yeah.
But when I think of something that's fitting, I think what I mean is, there's no law that demands it, but gosh, it just makes a great story now. And there's something about that story that lends itself to the truth.
Yeah, it is strongly in line with a particular character, right? So I think of fittingness in terms of a broad degree of expectation, right? And it has to be, I think, a broad degree of expectation, because if we want to say that the incarnation is fitting, well, it's in line with the character of God that is self-subsisting goodness itself, and goodness that wills the good of all that it creates, but also importantly seeks union with. So if you think that those are two kind of like prior commitments, then it's very fitting, right, that we would get something like the incarnation. And by fitting, I mean, when I say broad degree of expectation, I don't mean we could 100% accurately predict this is the way it had to happen or would have happened. But given that we have evidence that it seemed like it did happen, it fits really well with that prior context as something that called hypothesis can either explain really well or even broadly predict. That's how I think about it.
If a really good poet were writing this epic, that's the move he'd make.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, and but the most masterful poet of all. Is
exactly.
Right. Like it's too good for any human poet to write it this way.
Exactly.
And
that's it. So you have to be careful, because I know some Catholic theologians that throw the fitting thing around so much that it's become trivial, right? I mean, and so every problem we have, well, it must be fitting.
It must be. Yeah, no, I think you can make good fittingness arguments for a number of the mysteries. I think the core ones like the incarnation, and in fact, we can tie it in right now because Parisa has a second question about the Eucharist. Parisa says, what would be the reason for Christ to be really present in the Eucharist? What do we gain from this belief that would not be available if we just take it as a bare symbol? Well, I think there's a lot here, and I'll just say what sort of pushed me towards that view. Again, were largely philosophical considerations. The metaphysical nature of love, I think, is really important. And it's not just willing the good of other as other. There's a metaphysical basis in love, in unity. And I think if you miss out on this unity aspect, you're going to miss so much of what is so significant, I think, attractive about Catholic theology and participation metaphysics, right? I mean, the highest thing we're going for in life is intimate union. That's what the beatific vision is. It's the most intimate union we can get. What is the Eucharist? It's an invitation to the most intimate union you can have this side of heaven, right? So it's again very fitting of the love of God, but it's also fitting with the Old Testament, and this is where typology comes in. This is a little bit above my pay grade, but let me just make a fool of myself briefly. Right, is that if you think of Christ as the new sacrificial lamb, and you think back to the Passover, Brant Petrie is really great on this. What had to happen for the Passover feast to really be celebrated? Well, you had to find the unblemished lamb, you had to spill its blood, but then you had to eat it, right? You had to eat it. That was a significant part of it. You had to eat the lamb. And so if you have other kind of scriptural and I think very plausible theological commitments that whatever is in the new has to be elevated or higher than the old, this then becomes very fitting in a strange and mysterious way. Granted, right? This is spooky, wild stuff. Nobody denies that, but it's not out of the blue, right? It's something that flows from, I think, deep considerations of the metaphysics of love and prior revelation in the Old Testament. And when you have those connections, to me, it was something like, yeah, this has to be it, right? Like the doctrine of transubstantiation just fits so well with this in that context that was one of the things that I found. Like once you see it in that light, Jim, for me, like I couldn't go back to the hypothesis that it's just a mere symbol. Now we do think sacraments are symbols in a sense. It's a both and. They're signs of a deeper reality. So it's not either or for Catholics. It's a both and. But Jim, why don't you chime in?
Yeah, I mean, I don't. I mean, as you know, like my kind of like Catholic as historical momentum thing, right? I don't have a terribly good argument for it, but to say, basically, what you said is like that. Once you look at the grand sweep of Scripture and all that, it's not a proof, but it is very fitting that this would be the case. Yeah,
right. Yeah,
if the master poet were writing this thing, it's how it would go.
Yeah, right? And we should do a whole episode on the metaphysics of love. I think this is something that, like, there's a lot of really good recent Thomistic work being done on this too, which I think is really cool. But or we'll just do like a whole series on Thomistic personalism. You can tell that I'm like heavily influenced by the personalists, right?
Yeah,
that really dive into this stuff. All right, Parisa, we'll come back to your other question. I want to get some other people into the mix here. Anti-natalism. I don't know. Well, let's just do it, Jim. Let's do it. What do you got to say about anti-natalism? Parisa wants to know, do you have any thoughts on how to approach the question of why to have kids?
There has to be civilization. I mean, like, this somebody did this for you, right? Okay, and there is I see anti-natalism as it is the expression of the highest nihilism, right? When you've come to the point that we are not worth reproducing ourselves anymore, I see that's what counts for giving up on civilization, right? Now we could talk about population size and all that. These are considerations, okay, but like to say that somehow we shouldn't have children because life is nasty, brutal, and short, and humans are evil and humans are terrible and all that, that just is nihilism, okay? And the most virulent expression of it is this unwillingness to reproduce, right? That is giving up on the world, right? And moreover, this is something else Pat and I talked about a bit too, is like you don't have real skin in the game in the civilization unless you have children, right? Like there's unless you're worried about what will be bequeathed to your children and your children's children, it's not clear, whether or not you should be fully and completely trusted with the care of civilization, right? Because it's your binding to it by your children, right? And is what does it, right? So I mean, I guess if we want to know what's my argument for not being a nihilist, I don't know what that looks like, right? But I see anti-natalism as the most acute form of nihilism.
Yeah, or it's certainly a almost an immediate consequence of it. Yeah. Good. All right. Sorry, I got disconnected there for a minute, and I'm back, and now all the questions seem to be out of order. So,
I think let's see. Next one on mine here is Andrew Villalobos.
Why don't you start reading it? I'll pull it up if you don't mind.
I've been reading a bit about Nietzsche lately. What are your thoughts on the doctrine of the eternal recurrence of the same? Okay.
Dude, I have to tell you, man, when I was a high schooler reading Nietzsche on that, and we can talk about different interpretations, that used to haunt me.
Yeah. Well, he intends it to, right? Okay, so there's a number of places it shows up. Like, his first really formal version of it is in the Gay Science, right? Where he calls it the greatest weight. Okay.
Why don't we briefly, just explain what it is real quick too.
Okay, so the doctrine of the eternal recurrence of the same is this idea that every single second of your life will be repeated to infinity.
Yeah, and other lives if you have them.
Yeah. Okay. And so he brings it up. He calls it the greatest weight in the Gay Science. It's in many places in the Will to Power, where but sometimes it seems in the Will to Power, which is unfair because it's a notebook and it was like edited by his crazy sister and all that. He seems to think of it it's like a legit hypothesis in physics. Okay. In other places, Will to Power seems to be something much more subtle than that. Okay. Right. I think the most important discussion of it goes on in Also sprach Zarathustra, right towards the end. Okay. And it's interesting. So you have some people who interpret it like Robert Pippin interpret it as, I think Pippin does this. He's just really affirming the Greek view of the eternal universe because the Greeks saw history as a cycle that's repeated and stuff like that. I don't think that's the case. I don't think that's really what's going on there. I privilege the Zarathustra event of it, right? Because I think Zarathustra has a privileged position among Nietzsche's texts. Okay, sure. And it's interesting the way he introduces the eternal recurrence of the same in Zarathustra is this very spooky passage where somebody is at an arch between two roads going off to infinity either direction. Okay. And it is the greatest and most difficult thing to affirm his being at that arch between the two roads going in these two opposite directions, that he'll always be traveling. Okay. So you get the sameness there. All right. It seems that what's going on there is it's at that moment that that enlightenment has occurred. Okay. And what Nietzsche is doing there, he seems to be saying is like what enlightenment is to affirm the present as something stretched between the past and the future. Okay. And to say like the other places where the eternal recurrence comes up as literally every second of your life being repeated is what he's saying is there is no eternity. There is no being. There is just becoming. Okay. And what it is to accept that is to say, I'm happy with becoming however it comes out. Right. That like this second I'm in, the only eternity there is the repetition of this second to infinity. Right. and the next second, and the next second, and the next second, right? So it is on my read, this is Nietzsche inverting Plato.
Okay. So that's interesting because certainly that was never my first impression.
Yeah.
Now, again, when I was reading this as a high school, and I still am like wide open on interpretations of Nietzsche, and you've pushed me in certain directions. But Mencken, who wrote the first English book on Nietzsche, and he's by no means a formidable scholar of Nietzsche. He was he was just influenced by him and had the language skills that he could write a book on him. But yeah, he took the more haunting interpretation. So he thought it was Nietzsche himself was haunted by the idea that he would have to repeat this miserable life over and over and over. And like, it's like the more miserable you think your life is, right, the more haunting this idea becomes.
It's the greatest weight. But if you can affirm it, if you can say, yes, I affirm becoming, I don't need being, right? It's terrible, but yet it is liberation too for Nietzsche. Right?
Sure.
And it's interesting, if you go to the very opening of Zarathustra, and Zarathustra comes out of his cave, and the sun is rising, and Zarathustra says to the sun, because remember, like the sun in Plato is that which illumines everything, right? And Zarathustra says to the sun, well, I don't know, it seems like you're here for us to show yourself to, not for you to help us see other things. Okay. So you have from the very beginning of Zarathustra an inversion of Plato's cave, right? You have an inversion of Plato's metaphor of the sun. Okay. And the whole point of the book is to say, like, what the Übermensch would be the person who can affirm becoming all the way down with no need of being, right? Who needs absolutely no assurance, right, that their life adds up to something beyond their life, right? That finitude is enough, period, full stop, right? And so it is once again, it's not an affirmation of nothing, it's an affirmation of becoming.
Yeah, excellent. All right, very, very good. And we will, on the Philosophy for the People channel, we will definitely do a series on Nietzsche at some point,
definitely.
To be sure. And I will be an eager student in that one, because he's an enigma, that dude. Very, very influential in me in many respects, but he's somebody, even recently, Jim, in the conversations that we've had, that you return to him. Not different than many other thinkers, like Plato, right? Like constantly, like what I thought my commitments with Plato have been very undermined in a number of areas these past couple of years, and Nietzsche.
Same with me.
So Nietzsche and Plato are kind of in the same boat there. All right, let's keep moving on. Good stuff. I love the thoughtfulness of these penetrating questions here. Sorry, me getting disconnected totally messes up because it seemed to scramble around the order of the questions. So I might just have to take these as they're here right now. Here, let's.
Hey, by the way, but who said first come, first serve?
I think that was me, which means I can change that.
That's right. I mean, that's not the categorical imperative, right? I mean, like, it's this weird.
All right. Well, I'm just gonna take them as I see them here. Andrew says Aquinas says religion is a virtue of justice, while evolutionary psychology and cognitive science of religion define religion generally as a sociological reality. Is there an inherent difference between how Aquinas would define religion and how, say, the cognitive science of religion and evolutionary psychology understand religion? Yeah. I mean, like, they're just, first off, let's be clear about how unclear religion is in contemporary discussions. Religion is one of those things that philosophers notoriously cannot define. Right. This is one of the ongoing issues within just philosophy of religion. Is like, how do we get a definition of religion? Right. It just seems like we really can't do it. I mean, the best one that I've sort of found, I mean, like, you have really broad ones, like it's somebody's ultimate commitment, but that's not a very good definition. I mean, it sort of captures, it's trivial, right? Other ones are, it seems to be a form of life grounded in an experience of God or a monotheistic experience of God. But even that doesn't seem to capture everything we want to say about religion. So you just have this classic definitional problem of religion, where there's just no satisfactory definition that philosophers agree on here. Now, you're right. How does Aquinas think of religion? Well, he thinks of it as a virtue, and he thinks about it under the category of justice. Now, why is that? Because he sees it as an obligation, a form of life, where we sort of give God what he is owed, right? Which is obedience and worship and all these other things. So to not be a religious person is, for Aquinas, it's a vicious character trait, right? Like you're failing in the virtuous life if you're not a religious person. Now, is the average cognitive scientist going to say religion that way? Like,
but I mean, in fairness, it's apples and oranges. They're just two different questions being asked there, right? You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, right. Yeah. So, I mean, like,
it seems interesting and I've wondered this before, you know, by defining religion as a virtue in terms of giving divinity what it's owed, right? An atheist could be perfectly religious, right? Like if there is no God, what do you owe him, right? Nothing, right? You know what I mean?
Yeah, and this is one of those issues with this account. Issues are interesting.
Well, I have no problem with that. Yeah, you know what I mean.
Right. But then again, I just think, again, sort of the Aristotelian system is a package deal. If theism isn't true, I don't think any of it's true. Right? So,
I think this question does reveal this really important point, and in that, like, if you asked Aquinas, right, or any thinking person probably any person in the 11th century or 12th century, right, are you religious? And by that you meant what we mean by religion in whatever the hell we do mean by it in popular dialogue. They wouldn't know what you're talking about, right? I mean, like, there wasn't this. It's sort of like when whenever I see someone who has like a T-shirt on that says like I'm a Catholic, I'm like, okay, we're screwed now, okay? Because if you'd asked someone in the 12th century, are you a Catholic in that sense? They would like, what do you mean? What do you mean I'm a Catholic? Like, what else is there, right? It wasn't something separated from this sort of fertile network of understanding, right? Yeah. That you had to like hold up and defend independently. Mm-hmm. Do you see what I mean? Like so in this sense, to be religious for someone in say like the 10th century, or even like 4th century Greece, right? It wasn't a topic, right? Because it was written into the whole life. Do you know what I mean? And it's like we only are able to like pull out what is religion as an object, in as much as like we've already desiccated it to a very, very high degree, right? Mm-hmm. Like in as much as something can be an object of like scientific study like that, you're dissecting it like a fetal pig in biology class now, right? That's right. And I think those kinds of questions just didn't occur to someone like Aquinas because it's not a fetal pig in biology class. It's a living organ.
Yeah. E.B. White says the same thing of humor. If you try to dissect it, it dies in the process.
It dies,
and you lose it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
But so I mean, so if you have to have a T-shirt on it declaring yourself this to other people, it's dead. You've pulled it out. It's like I don't walk around with a T-shirt that says I have a liver. Right. Because that's just a natural part of me now.
Right. Yeah. Now, just a few other comments here.
So I betray my anxiety by by having to display it.
Yeah. So, the evolutionary psychologists, what are they doing? Well, they're trying to give a sort of causal story that may or may not be competitive of how we came to hold particular religious beliefs, right? So that's what they're trying to do. Like, I know talking
disposed to it at all, or something like that.
Right, and again, and I say may or may not be competitive because there's many religious evolutionary psychologists that think that that's just all part of God's providence. If He wanted to bring about certain beliefs to an evolutionary process, so be it. But if you're a naturalist, then you have to give a story of how we develop these false beliefs rather than true beliefs, right? So. Yeah, to my mind, it really is just apples and oranges. Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. But it is a good and pressing question. All right, let's keep rolling here. Octa says, question for Jim about Hauser's logic book. Would you agree that Hauser isn't nearly or at all as critical of symbolic logic as Kreeft or Sullivan in his book? Also, what is it about his book that makes it such a superb book compared to others? Is it the inclusion of rhetoric, treatment of conditionals, or the chronology of logicians in the appendix? Bonus question, have you heard of the logic book by David Kelly, who is an objectivist called The Art of Reasoning? So first off, I don't think people should be, and then I'll let you answer, Jim, overly critical of symbolic logic. I've got my old symbolic logic book here, complete with its old coffee stains, by Susan Sanger. This is a tremendous book in symbolic logic if anybody wants to study it. I think the point Jim and I have tried to emphasize is don't get taken in by all these pseudo problems. Right. That's clearly symbolic logic is a very powerful tool, but you have to realize it's a restricted tool, and you don't want to sort of like, again, like draw metaphysics out of a method type of thing. Right.
Yep. I mean, look, I use a book I co-authored with a colleague of mine in my own logic class. So I don't use any of these, right? I think if I were to use different, I'd probably use Hauser's. Okay. At the end of the day, I don't have a terribly high view of Kreef's book. Okay. It's full of errors. I mean, there's just so many typos in it. And I know Trent Doherty tried to go through and fix all of it. There's still tons of mistakes in there. And I think there's some even technical logical problems, some things that go on, or at least controversial. And also the book is written as this polemic against symbolic logic. Do you know what I mean? And a polemic against nominalism, polemic, all these things. And it's sort of like, I don't like defining logic by this like polemical other, right? Do you know what I mean? And I think it's a distraction from much that goes on there. So I have used Kreeft in class. It's fine, but it is far from my first choice of book to use.
Okay. You would use, so I do like Kreeft's book, but your points are well taken on that. I think the best critique in Kreeft's book is actually the section written by Doherty.
Yeah.
That is,
exactly.
On some of the issues and restrictions with modern logic.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
I think Kreeft's book is just great if you just want to get the basics of Aristotelian logic. It's really good for that, and the exercises are good. Yeah. Would you be quicker to recommend Sullivan's these days?
Probably? I mean Sullivan's because in terms for self-study, because it's briefer, it's overall easier, it's leaner. I also think he's pretty polemically unfair to modern logic, right? Okay, you know what I mean? Be careful, like, because I'm not coming out to apologize for modern logic, right? Once again, I think much of what goes on in the debates between analytic philosophers and traditional Thomists about logic is just people talking past each other, right? I mean, do you know what I mean? And
yes, of course,
these are different tools for entirely different purposes, and do you see what I mean? And so I find that whole debate really morbid, right? Okay. And as far as Hauser's go, I think you have full coverage. You've got rhetoric and all that stuff in there. You also have I think a pretty fair treatment of modern logic in there, pretty fair, right? And he does interesting work with conditionals and things like that, which I think is very important. It's very important. Clearly, we think in conditionals and stuff. And so that's why I would say of those are the ones I would go with, right? But I'll say this. That's the one I would go with. But I'll say this is like anyone who has taught logic long term eventually writes a logic textbook because you are only going to be satisfied with the one you wrote, right?
Yeah, so, exactly.
Yeah. So like right now, my colleague Andy Jager and I are constantly revising our logic textbook, and then we distribute it as a course pack. Yeah.
Can I get a copy of that?
Sure. Yeah. It's called Ill Logic. We originally wanted to do the whole thing with a Beastie Boys theme to it.
That's awesome.
Like ill community. We didn't pull it off. It got too tedious. It was like there's only so many there's only so many like Beastie Boy themed examples we could come up with, right? So
do you have that available on Amazon or anything?
We don't. Yeah.
You just give it to students. Yeah.
Yeah. We could actually, we distribute it. We sell it as a course pack to our students, right?
Okay.
But I mean, I'll send you a copy of it. But I'll say this.
No, that'd be awesome.
We are going to make it like available, in like a Kindle on Amazon, but we want to rewrite the modern logic part. So the modern logic part that we had in there, we did a very, very similar proof theoretic system to like what you find in a book by a guy named E.J. Lemon called an Introduction to Logic or Beginning Logic, which is like a really hard book. Okay. And excuse me, we've just come to the conclusion, like what we were doing in Ill Logic with the modern logic section, it was too hard and served no purpose. Like people just don't need to do like very, very difficult derivations of theorems. Right. And it's like, it's fun at the right kind of party. Okay. But we're just kind of being cruel to our students here doing this. Okay. So we're rewriting the modern logic part of it to do it all based on substitution instances of basic forms.
Yeah. So, I think that's good. I think
so. When I have that, like we're gonna make it available on Amazon.
Nice. Yeah. Well, we will be sure to announce it when it's ready. That'd be cool. All right. Andrew says McIntyre is accused of being a relativist. Is it true that his understanding of tradition constituted rationality is subject to that critique? What do you think, Jim?
Kind of means it depends what you mean by subject to that critique. If you mean, are people reasonable to raise it? Yes, right. Is the critique successful? No, it's not, right. McIntyre, some people, I don't know that he uses this phrase, some people will characterize him as a sort of postmodern pre-modernist, right? Okay. And because he does think that the inquiry has to begin with a set of first principles, and those first principles are optional to many rational people. Okay. And so I think that's what separates, like, say, McIntyre from, say, a really classical Thomist, who would say, no, there's a set of first principles and they're not optional. Like a reasonable person, any reasonable person will recognize that if they're not, there's something wrong. Okay. McIntyre has this sort of Hegelian strain to him. He has a Hegelian strain to him, where the first principles of the inquiry are basically justified by the inquiry. Okay. And so he ends up with a position where, on my reading of it, is there's an absolute truth, but there are epistemically privileged positions to be in with respect to it. Okay. And so someone might be lucky in a way to have been habituated into these first principles before they were rationally available to them, such that they were able to conduct an inquiry that ultimately vindicates those rational first principles. Okay. But I don't think McIntyre is confident that position could be justified to somebody outside of that stream of inquiry. Right? You have to go through the process that would begin with taking up those principles to see why retrospectively they are the right set of principles. Okay. Right. So, and he thinks that once you've kind of, ascended that, you can see why you are right, and it's objectively true that you're right. Okay. But it seems to me, he's willing to grant that someone on the outside of that might not see it by no fault of their own. Right.
Yeah. Sorry, Jim. I'm scrolling through trying to find the next question here. So I'm just going to assume that you answer that to their satisfaction.
And his best text on this is Three Rival Versions of Moral Inquiry.
Yeah. There was a question here I really wanted to pull up. Here it is, just because it's just funny. Grant says, Jim, I feel like a real dumbass for asking a fitness question, given all the other questions. But here it goes. You're not, sir. This is a free-for-all Q&A. You can ask whatever you want. I know we're getting a lot of great philosophy questions, but you can throw anything you want here. And Grant wants to know, which of the tactical barbell conditioning exercises gave you the most bang for your buck?
Okay, so I guess I don't have to just say one here, do I? Okay.
No, I don't.
My two would be apex hill sprints and fun runs. Okay. Apex hill sprints are the combination between doing heavy kettlebell swings and hill sprints. You do a sprint, you do a set of 10 heavy-ish kettlebell swings at the top of the hill, you walk down, repeat, keep going, right? And I got to the point where I was doing, I wasn't doing it every day, right? I could do 20 reps on, a very long hill. We're talking like 150-meter hill, with the beast. Okay. But I tell you that I think that's a very good bang for your buck, right? Because you're getting strong, you're getting some conditioning in, you're getting all your conditioning systems going. Because if you're going to do like 20 of those, you're not going completely anaerobic the whole time. You're going to get some aerobic flow going, all that. Okay. The other thing is the fun runs, which for K Black this is like kind of just standard military stuff.
I love that name, the fun run.
Fun run, yeah. Is you just go out and you're going to jog, and like really slow jog, and you're going to have a clock set, and however many minutes, up to you, you're going to hit the deck and do a certain number of push-ups, certain number of squats, a certain number of sit-ups, get up and go again to your clock runs again, right? I still do those with burpees, right? I'll go out and jog, and then, I'll go every other block, I'll do a set of like 10 or 15 burpees, right? And so it helps me, because then I end up running less, because running kind of beats me up a little bit. So I end up running less, but I still get a great conditioning workout in, and I can still go out and be in the outdoors for an hour and do that, right? And I really found, especially when I was still doing the triathlon thing, the fun run thing seemed to move the needle for me, where I would throw those calisthenics into the middle of just a straight boring jog. Yeah. So those are my two go-to: fun runs and apex hill sprints.
Cool. Good to break up all the dense philosophy with.
And I think the non-military world has K Black to thank for popularizing those those things.
Awesome. Catholic Base says, should I get metaphysics down before I enter the domain of political philosophy? So that's an interesting question. In fact,
well, you're never going to enter political philosophy then. So you.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'll give, kind of my backstory here that I've said before. One of the first branches of philosophy I was very interested in at a relatively young age was, of course, political philosophy. Now, it's kind of like broadly pretty liberal at a young age, but then I was very attracted to libertarian thought and economics. And then, as political philosophy bumps up against ethical questions. So then you have to spill over, right? All this stuff is interconnected. And I actually put a tweet out yesterday, and I was trying to be sincere in it, where I say, a lot of people who get into philosophy, say they want to get into philosophy, but really what they want is just reassurance of prior beliefs. And like, that was kind of me, right? It's kind of all of us, if we're being honest. And I was like, yeah, I want to justify my libertarianism. So let me start looking at ethics. And then, and then what happened to my libertarianism? It went poof, right?
I have gone through a very, very personally dark process of trying to get over that in the last 5, 6, 7 years. I'm still not 100%. I'm still doing ad hoc at sometimes.
Yeah. So I mean, a lot of things that I set out looking for reassurance of got exploded, but I'll say in the long run, that was my atheism got exploded, my libertarianism got exploded. Now there's still, elements of things I left behind that were good and I still appreciate, but by going into philosophy, I didn't, at least not initially, and still many times don't find the reassurance I'm looking for. And I think that's, we've said this before, I think that's why you have to set your primary target as truth, right? And you have to be really intentional about that, because if you don't, I think the default position is people will just fall into confirmation bias and motivated reason. So you have to make a really hard effort. And again, I'm not, at least I hope I'm not preaching from from the soapbox. I'm as susceptible to this as anybody, right? You have to just be really intentional in saying, come hell or high water, I'm just going to try and figure out the truth of these things. So I would say, yeah, Catholic, to even for me, when I was searching out political philosophy, it's all connected. So you're going to have to get to ethical and metaphysical questions anyways. Yeah. And then once I got there, I don't have, I think this would be kind of, actually, Jim, I was thinking about this. It'd be fun to pose some questions in political philosophy or contemporary issues where I think I can genuinely say I'm an ideal agnostic about. Yeah. And then me and you just do a 3-month study, right? Yeah, and just because and by ideal agnostic, mean I could go either way, and emotionally, personally, it doesn't bother me. So I think I could kind of look at the arguments on both sides and see where I fall. So whereas when I was younger, I had very, very strong political commitments. Now, I'm definitely broadly conservative in a natural law of virtue ethics sense, but that doesn't mean much in contemporary culture these days, right? Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think my short answer to that is yes. There's a reason Aristotle calls metaphysics first philosophy, right? So yeah, Jim, your thoughts.
Yeah, well, it's first in that it's prime.
It's primary, right?
Yeah, primary. Yeah. Doesn't necessarily mean it's first in where you start the youngsters, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
This question, Catholic based, has really been fascinating me for the last couple months since I started teaching the Republic again, right? Because is the Republic, is it a book on metaphysics or political philosophy? Yes, it is, right? And it's interesting, if you take the order, the way Socrates proceeds in Republic is he feels he has to answer the political question of justice first before he answers the metaphysical question about the soul and its fate and monotheism, all that. You see what I mean? Okay, so I think you could read the Republic as saying the political is the prior and maybe the more controlling discipline. Okay, but then his failure to come up with a coherent, it seems by his own admission, of political philosophy in the Republic is very troubling then, right? Aristotle in the Community Ethics begins with, goodness in the individual and works up to the political. So you can see maybe you're going to see the political as secondary to these other questions, right? But what the priority is between the political and the metaphysical has become a very, very deliciously open question for me in my own re-encounter with Plato and Aristotle. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of the debate between the two of them.
Yeah. And this is why, to be a good philosopher, you do have to be a generalist, right? Because there's always itches that need scratching. You start in one area, say metaphysics, but then there's epistemological issues that come up. So then you have to do epistemology, right?
Yeah, and graduate education today does not reward this. So
no, it doesn't. And that's part of the issue. Yeah. So be a man and do it all, right? That's the short of it.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
All right, let's see.
Be a para-academic, yeah.
All right, Jim, this one's definitely for you. William wants to know, what are the best works on Hegel in the secondary literature?
The best, like, just sit down and read it in maybe 1 or 2 sittings. Introduction to Hegel is a book by a guy named Harnack. It's published by Hackett. It's a cheap little book. It's called An Introduction to Hegel's Logic. I found that very, very, very helpful. If you want a longer kind of commitment, okay, and I think for me, the very best overall introduction to Hegel, and specifically the phenomenology of spirit, which is where the real money is a book by a guy named, I'm going to mispronounce his name, Kelkovich. Okay, Kelkovich. It's called The Logic of Desire, right? And it's a commentary on Hegel's phenomenology of spirit. It's called The Logic of Desire. It is a superb piece of work, and you could read it just as a monograph in its own right very easily. You could also just read it as a read-along companion to the phenomenology of spirit. I think they both reward, right? But those are my 2 go-tos, right? Charles Taylor's short book on Hegel is very helpful. The long book is brilliant, but that's an investment of your time. Right.
It's a lifestyle choice.
Yeah, it's a lifestyle choice. Yeah. Like all his books, right? But and there's like I like Kojève's introduction to the reading of Hegel, which is a set of lectures that he gave. But I think they may at the end of the day have precious little to do with Hegel, right? So, but I think it's a very useful exercise, right? So, but I'd go Kelkovich or Harnack.
Right. Yeah. Here's a related question. This comes from our friend Jacob Power. He says, question for Jim. A buddy of mine was saying that he doesn't see any point in reading the absolute idealists like Hegel. This may be true for his journey, but in general, what is the value of reading them?
Well, one, I want to know how the guy could know there's no value in reading them if he hasn't read them. Okay. And what's the value in reading anybody is, well, they might be right. Okay. I mean, once again, I think this goes back to what we said earlier is, are we doing philosophy to confirm what we already have, or are we actually open-endedly looking for the truth, right? I know this is difficult, if you've got religious commitments and stuff like that, right? But I think we should not think of the compatibility of faith and reason doesn't work like this, where I think it doesn't work like this, where I got a set of creedal statements and that's going to make me cherry pick what I think reason is telling
and just ignore anything that's going to criticize those creedal statements.
Because that's not a synthesis, right? That's a conformity.
And that's certainly not the posture Aquinas took, right?
Right. Okay. I'm not going to just cherry pick and say, well, this is wrong because it doesn't match my creedal statement. Okay. It might be that what my creedal statements mean is ambiguous, and I'm going to have to disambiguate it by what I find out from reason. Do you see what I mean? Okay. Yeah. There's limits to that kind of thing, I grant you. Okay. So I would say, what's the reason what's a good reason to read the absolute idealists like Hegel? Is because they might be right about something.
Yeah, and that's the key. They might be right about something, right? So we were talking about this, right? Yeah, or everything. Yeah. They could be spot on, but we were talking about this before. Is like, look, I'm not a Marxist, right? If anybody didn't guess that, but Marx had some important critiques, right? He's an important guy that everybody needs to read if you're serious about like the big ideas of history, right? So he's not somebody that just because your favorite, political commentator makes fun of Marxists, it doesn't mean that there's no value in reading somebody like Marx. There's tons of value. I read all the time people I disagree with all the time. And in fact, I think I often get more value in that because it makes me think harder than the people I do agree with. So
how do I know I disagree with them until I read them?
Right. Right. Yeah. Right. I only know I disagree with them as I'm reading them. Right. Yeah. And sometimes I'm convinced. Sometimes they get me. Yeah.
And so I think a lot of times what like my students want from me is to give them a safe reading list. Like, here's a list of books that if you just read these books, I guarantee you will be exactly the same as you are right now after you read them. Right. Mm-hmm. Okay. And well, I'm not doing that. That's not philosophy.
Right. Yeah.
It's not philosophy. Philosophy is risky.
Yeah. Floyd, friend Floyd says, simple question. Are there any poets or poems you enjoy reading? Yes, there are.
I can't get enough T.S. Eliot.
Parmenides.
Yeah. I love T.S. Eliot a lot. I spend a lot of time with T.S. Eliot.
Yeah, I've got there's a lot. I've always loved E.B. White, including his poems. He's one of my favorite prose stylists. I have Rumi's poems right over there.
Nice.
Those are something I got into when I was younger and always found a lot of just beauty and goodness in them. So I don't read poetry nearly as often as I do, just dense, philosophy books and stuff like that. But I do enjoy it, and so yeah. T.S. Eliot.
T.S. Eliot has been a major source of consolation to me for a while.
Yeah, very, very good. All right, let's keep rocking and rolling. Sam says, modern scientists are positing that the universe was inflating before the Big Bang and the universe time could be infinite. Is that a problem for classical theists if infinite regress is true? No, it's not. This is something that Aquinas was explicit about. The universe could be eternal as an everlasting, infinite into the past, but it's still not going to answer the fundamental question of why is there anything that is contingent instead of nothing instead, right? So to understand classical theism is to understand its neutrality on this consideration, right? If you don't understand that, then you're not getting at the heart of classical theism. Now, if you're trying to push something like a Kalam argument, this would be a consideration, right? But there's new advances in philosophical arguments against possible chain of infinite causes, which would be sort of independent of that. But for classical theists, I think the answer is an obvious hard no on this.
And if I may, if the listener were to go to jdmadden.com in the philosophy section, I have a paper on this on the Eternity of the World debate that I think would shed light on this. It's called Infinite Creator, Finite Creation, and there's a podcast version of it, me reading that paper in the podcast section on jdmadden.com. So you want to check that out.
Yeah. And it's one of those things where I think it's, when we think of like an infinite regress, we have to understand there's like different ways that this is postulated. But at the end of the day, for contingency style arguments, they're never going to give you an explanation of what they're presupposing. That's the fundamental issue, right? So, Leibniz, of course, gives the famous example with the Euclid textbooks, which he would have learned from, right? Imagine that one's copied from another just infinitely into the past, right? It still makes perfect sense to ask, well, why is there this series of textbooks at all? And why is it geometry and not biology or something like that, right?
Why this set?
Right. So an infinite contingent regress presupposes existence, right, in the system, which is precisely what contingency cannot explain. And once you get that fundamental insight, you'll see that it's certainly not a threat to classical theism, but it's not at all even, I think, an interesting objection, let alone a good one, to contingency style arguments. And in fact, if you I'll go even further. I think if you think that something like an infinite regress of contingent things like that is possible, it's only possible insofar as there is a necessary foundation that would predict continued existence, right? Because continued existence remains mysterious, certainly inexplicable of contingent things, unless there's a necessary foundation which perfectly predicts continued existence. You see that? I know you see that, but that's a rhetorical. I know Jim's.
Amen, brother.
Jim sees all things, right? But this is one of those very common things that always comes up, so it's worth a little extra.
I like that idea. Jim sees some things.
Jim sees all things.
All things. At least one.
Let's take a hard turn to fitness again. Mike says, I'm very long, 6'5", and have found that I need to reduce the volume in most kettlebell programs. 20% less reps per set seems to hit the sweet spot. Thoughts on adjusting programs based on body proportions?
I never thought of that because, like, if you're 6'5", you got a longer trip.
It's a long stroke, man. Yeah. So, Mike, I have no issue with that, man.
And it's funny, we would assume if he's 6'5", like, okay, you're not going to be Mr. Squatter, right? Like, that's a common thing. But I never thought with kettlebells. It's like, you have to move that bell further, right? Now you're naturally bigger. That's an interesting question. I don't have any specific thoughts on this, but to say, Mike, I think you've enlightened me by the question.
Right. Yeah. All right, we're hitting our hour right now, Jim. Are there any other questions you see here? Why don't you take a pick? Why don't you take a pick of one?
I wanted to get to the McIntyre one. I'm glad we did.
Jim gets the final pick here. Gentle listeners, thank you for the awesome questions as always. If we didn't get to yours, you're always welcome to resubmit it in the next stream.
Right. Yeah. Or put it on the YouTube. And
I see a lot of good back and forth and dialogue. So some of these things aren't questions. People are arguing respectfully. We love argument. That's arguments are philosophers' love language. But always keep it. Don't be a person of low estate. Let's say that in the comments. Keep it classy.
It's a question about transcendental arguments. What's it? Nick B. Rocks, transcendental argument. Question, is transcendental argument underlying Thomas's 5 proofs? The reason I ask is nothing is made actual except by that which is already in act. Thus, that one concludes God is the, then goes on. I find it interesting just because it would depend what you mean by a transcendental argument. Like if you mean by a transcendental argument where like the term comes from originally in Kant's transcendental argument, the first critique, not at all. It's a very different kind of question. So I think I would say no. Yeah, so no worries there.
Yeah, sweet. All right, Jim, what do we have to announce before we wrap this Freaky Friday up?
Nothing I'm aware of. So just plugging along. Yeah.
Somebody, last thing, Running says, my question on concurrentism, please. Sorry, I'll have to scroll up to see it. But if you want a good defense of concurrentism, the guy to go through on that is W. Matthews Grant's recent book, Divine Universal Causality. He gives a great defense of some of the more recent critiques of concurrentism in there. So if that's a question that's hot on your mind, I would recommend that. And it also is one of the best books on free will out there as well. Yeah, what are we working on here at the Pat Flynn Show and Philosophy for the People? So let me say one more time, if you're on the Pat Flynn Show stream right now, please go over to the Philosophy for the People channel, because we are going to be moving all philosophy content over there exclusively, probably in the next month or so. So let me put it right there for you guys, if you wouldn't mind subscribing if you're interested in the stuff Jim and I are doing with the series on Plato's Republic. And we're going to do Aristotle's Ethics next, and then sounds like Nietzsche's in the queue.
Yeah, it's right in the queue.
So we'll do some cool stuff on that. And what else, man? I'm cranking away.
My colleague Andrew Jager and I are talking about resurrecting the Being Real podcast that we did briefly for a while. I think the format, we're not sure, but the format would be each of us would take a sentence or two from what we're currently reading, and we would read that and then start just riffing on it. We'll see how that goes. So
sweet, man.
So you all may have that to look forward to. Yeah.
Right. Beautiful. All right. Well, thank you, gentle listeners, for giving us a very stimulating Freaky Friday here. We hope you have an awesome weekend. Do us a favor, please like, comment, share, subscribe, all that good stuff for the algorithm. Gotta respect the algorithm.
The man's gonna get his.
And we'll catch you guys on the next stream. Peace.